This nation was founded on the principle that all men are created equal.
We hold these truths to be self-evident.
That all men
are created equal.
I'll tell you what freedom is to me. No fear. I mean, really, no fear.
Created equal.
This is Created Equal from WDET in Detroit. I'm Stephen Henderson, and I'm in the studio with Kerry Jr. II. He is our show's producer.
Good morning, Stephen.
Hey, Kerry, how are you?
I'm all right. I'm doing well.
Very good. Mm-hmm. So we have been talking for a long time on the show about this project on the east side of downtown Detroit to get rid of I-375 and create something else in its place. And that something else has become, I think, a lightning rod of sorts for discussion and argument. State of Michigan wants to create a road where the freeway is, and then perhaps, at least, make way for some development along the sides of that new road. Lots of people think that's an inadequate way to do it, that we need to think much more deeply about the wrongs that were committed when the freeway was built, the destruction of Paradise Valley and Black Bottom, two historically black neighborhoods here in the city, and that we got to be really intentional about the way that gets repaired. There's been a lot of back and forth between the state, which is leading this project, and the community around I-375. And we're kind of waiting right now, I think, for the state to respond to some of the requests that have been put before it to really think about this differently. But of course, there are lots of voices that are weighing in now about what this plan looks like and whether it measures up to what we should be doing.
Yeah, they proposed a boulevard for how they want to re-envision the freeway, and that just didn't seem adequate enough for the local residents around there. Also, there was concerns about the construction itself and how that would impact the experience of being in that area and the businesses in that area. And so, as you said before, they put out requests to the state, to the mayor, trying to say, like, let's sit back and make sure we're abiding by at least the local residents' wishes as they try to think about what redevelopment looks like. As you said, there's been a lot of people weighing in. And more recently, we've had a county executive, Warren Evans, weigh in on this one. He's written a more recent opinion piece questioning whether this redevelopment project, who this redevelopment project is for, echoing really the sentiments of a lot of people, I feel like, who've been wondering if they claim that they're going to try and fix the harms of the past when they built the freeway originally through the neighborhoods, how, when they redevelop this, are they going to then honor that? And so we have Executive Warren Evans on today to kind of talk to you about and talk to us about his thoughts about that project, where we think we are. And I'm wondering kind of what the next steps are, because this has sparked, as you said, a lot of conversation. And I'm wondering if it's about if this is going to be a transportation project on its own.
Well, I mean, I think that's the real question.
Right.
Is, can we get beyond talking about the road and what becomes of the road? And I'm not blaming anybody for that. I mean, MDOT is the agency that was assigned to deal with this at the state level, and that's what they do. They deal with roads. But we need leadership from a number of different places, I think, to get us to the space where we're talking about something much more than that. I mean, the idea that you would create a boulevard where I-375 is and call yourself finished with the project, I think it's not just inadequate, it's a little bit insulting. And so we've got to get to a better space. And as you said, Wayne County Executive Warren Evans is adding his voice to those that are saying we can do better.
Yeah.
Warren Evans, Wayne County Executive. Always great to talk with you. Great to have you in the studio with us today.
Thanks, Stephen. It's always great to be here. I enjoy it.
So I want to start just by reading just a little bit of the piece that you had published in the Detroit Free Press last week, September 19th. I'm sorry, it wasn't September 19th. It's July. You say on Thursday there was, well, this is another piece, actually. this was the piece that you wrote in 2022 about this. You recently wrote another piece that I want to quote from. You say that tearing down the thoroughfare is part of a major project to redesign and rebuild this traffic corridor. And you talk about the hundreds of families, black families, that were punished really by the construction of I-375. And you say that we are kind of poised to repeat this error, that we're just not we're not doing this in a way that would repair the damage that was done. You say that it's supposed to be with us in mind, the African American community, that this is being done, but you just don't see that. As you say in the piece, please, are you serious?
Yeah, I mean it is. I think insulting that the sell for the project has almost been from day one, and I think my first op-ed was 2022. Was that it talked about righting the wrongs of the past, and there was nothing definitive in there that would make any reasonable person think that anything was going to be done for the purpose of repairing the past. I mean, you repair the past by doing things that make for opportunities for people of color whose community was destroyed, 60, 50 years ago. And I don't see it much different now. I mean, I have not been deep enough in the project to determine whether the practical aspects of raising 375 or not make sense. I mean, I don't know. But the way they're going about it, to me, makes absolutely no sense. And I don't think this is really the state's project. I mean, I think it's the state's project in the context of, MDOT is the one who does the engineering and does the work. But I mean, I don't think the state woke up one morning and said raising 375 was a good deal for Detroit. I think it's business interests who see great value in doing it, and there's really nothing intrinsically wrong with that. But those people don't look like me.
Right. Right. When you think of this area, tell me what comes to mind for you. I mean, you're of an age that you would remember some of what was there and what this was like and why it mattered.
Well, I mean, what mattered was the black population of Paradise Valley and Black Bottom was actually a vibrant community where black people supported black businesses. And that was a way of life like it is in 99% of the rest of the world in the country. I mean, that's the way things go. And the ability for professionals of color and store owners, their viability going forward has an awful lot to do with people that look like them that support their businesses. Not solely, but I mean, that's part of it. So when you come through and destroy that and displace all of those businesses, displace all of those people for 50, 60 years, and then come back with an idea that maybe we can right these wrongs by raising 375. And my point is raising it does nothing for the equity position of, community destroyed and whatever. And nobody is saying, in my mind, anything specific about just what that remedy would be. I see a lot of, I've never seen a project where there was more talk about diversity and inclusion as a part of, we'd like to get, businesses of color doing some of the construction work and that other sort of stuff. I mean, that's just talk. I mean, where are the companies that can do it? And what's the overall plan? Are we looking at any of those businesses that were displaced to see if any of them are still open and viable? And are there places, if it's raised, that those businesses could locate? I mean, those things are important to me, and I would think they were important to anybody who wants to believe that the right thing's being done.
Let's talk about the way in which this is being done, and I want to talk about it from an historical perspective first. And what you just mentioned, I think, is important. This idea of maybe trying to find people today who are connected to, in some way, the people who were displaced in the late 1950s when this happened, businesses that maybe still are operating, families that still are in the community. You've been a part of this community for a long time. Give us a sense of how easy you think that would be. I mean, and I ask that knowing what I know what the answer is because I live here too. These are not long lost artifacts that you've got to go digging around for. If you live in this community, you know these people, you interact with these businesses, you interact with these families. This is not something we have to go hunting for. It's something we all live with.
Absolutely, and they're fourth generation families. My family's been here for over 100 years, and has drawn. My grandfather was a doctor in the city. One of the founders of Dunbar Hospital, which was arguably one of the first black hospitals in the city. That was necessary so that black doctors could actually see black patients.
Practice,
people don't understand that, people can come into the office, but they didn't have hospital privileges. And so, there are a number of families, certainly mine not the only one, that's been around here for a long time. We've seen the displacement of businesses, and we've seen the fact that the African-American community is necessary to support African-American professionals and African-American businesses. Now, that's not an argument about racism. That's an argument about reality.
Practicality, really.
Right. And, proximity to those businesses is important. And what I'm seeing from this project is just a lot of what my grandmother would have called lip service about what we'd like to see happen, with no definitive plans to make that happen in any way that people of color would feel comfortable. So, I mean, that's my big argument. I think that there's a difference between going out into the community and talking to people with a rehearsed plan, and going out to the community to ask the question of what would you all like to see happen, and what are the equity concerns that you have, and how do we make that happen? And I don't think the latter is what happened. I think it was much more the former.
Yeah. We need to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to continue talking with Warren Evans, who is the county executive here in Wayne County. We're going to get going on the phones and on social as well. Give us a call. Let us know what you make of the plans to get rid of I-375 on the east side of downtown Detroit, replace it with another road, but also maybe it's an opportunity to right the wrongs that were committed when that freeway was built. How would you do that? How would you go about making sure that the community here in Detroit is part of that decision-making process? What do you make of the process so far? Do you think it's possible to right the wrongs of the past with a project like this? What would that look like? How would we go about it? 313-577-1019 is the number here on the phones. That's 313-577-1019. You can also go to Twitter, #CreatedEqual, or at WDET. We'll be right back with more Created Equal. We're back with more Created Equal from WDET in Detroit. I'm Stephen Henderson, and I'm really glad you've joined us. We're talking with Warren Evans. He is the county executive here in Wayne County, a prominent political voice in our community. And last week, he wrote a piece questioning the process that's being used to to decide what happens after the state gets rid of I-375, this very short freeway spur that was built on the east side of downtown in the early 1960s. We've been talking about that for a long time in this community. What should happen when you get rid of I-375, and what should be informing those decisions? The damage that was done to two historically black communities when that freeway was built, Black Bottom and Paradise Valley, is something that a lot of people think should be kind of front and center in that conversation, and they worry that it hasn't been. We would love to hear from you during the conversation as well. 313-577-1019 is the number here on the phones. You can also go to Twitter, #CreatedEqual or @WDET, and be part of the program that way. I do want to begin this segment, Warren, with another quote from the piece that you wrote. You say, this updated thoroughfare promises a slower speed boulevard that will consequently be safer by removing that steep curve and adding LED lighting while removing 15 old bridges and 2 stormwater runoff pump stations and building out wider sidewalks, protected bike lanes, and pedestrian crossings. You say, that's nice, but again, who asked for it? Why the sudden massive concern for diversity and inclusion on this one specific project when I can't recall any other large project in recent memory that has lit such a fire about the need for expelling the ghosts of Detroit's racially tumultuous past? I want to ask you about the process of doing projects of this scale. And one of the reasons is you're the county executive. The county builds a lot of stuff around town, has a lot of things that it needs to do in people's communities. So give us a sense of when you do this, when the county has to disrupt a neighborhood or change things. What does it look like to get the community's input? How do you do this in a way that makes people feel like not just that they've been heard, but that they've had influence over the process?
It's a chore, and building the criminal justice complex, for one, was one where significant outreach to the community didn't make everybody happy, made some people reasonably content. But the concerns that they had weren't necessarily the concerns that the planners would initially see. So a lot of traffic rerouting, ways to present crossover from the criminal justice complex into the neighborhood, those things occurred. I don't ever want to sugarcoat it. I'm sure there are people who didn't like that decision tree, and those sorts of things. But you need to do them. And the difference here was this was not something, the criminal justice complex was not something we attempted to sell as a remedy for prior problems.
Right.
This was an
you
economic.
Needed a new jail.
Yeah. We needed a new jail. And while nobody likes jails, unfortunately, we haven't gotten to the place where we don't have to have them. And so, we build a new complex. I mean, I hate to really call it a jail because there's a courthouse there, there's a prosecutor's office, there's a sheriff's office, all new construction that allows us to consolidate a lot of things so there's an overall cost savings to the general public also.
Yeah.
But it's not easy.
So when you think about this project then, and again, it's the state that's leading this and it's MDOT that's leading this, what advice would you have for them about what an inclusive process would look like? They've had public hearings over a long period of time, in fact, invited people to come down and talk about what's going on. There is also a list of requests that they've been forwarded from people in the community for change in the project. They haven't really responded to that yet. But if you were in charge of MDOT or the governor of the state instead of the Wayne County executive, what would that process look like?
Well, I mean, I think, in many respects, the horses are already out of the barn.
It's too late.
and so going back is somewhat difficult. But I think that you can't do enough reaching out to folks in the community. I lived for many years in Lafayette Park. I know the area, and quite frankly, east or west of 375, there may be different ideas about what's important because one side is residential, the other side is, more business. But I mean, when you hear from people, let's have some feedback about what the people said. I mean, it's almost like an airing session. Well, let's get this out of your lungs now. Let's talk about what you want. Okay, and then we go back to the drawing board, and the person's still sitting there thinking, like, did anybody hear me? Is there a process that's going to include what I talked about? If they're not going to do it, is there a rational reason why it's not going to happen? I mean, not everything you ask for, are you going to get or should you get? But you should get feedback about what it is. And as I said here, really the ire that this caused for me was in the cell. Don't make this about what you're going to do for people of color when that has very little to do with anything I've seen to this point. The project may be a good one. It may be a terrible one. I have stayed out of that and am not a major player in the decision because it's not a Wayne County project. But as a person of color who's been here his whole life and has seen the destruction of Black Bottom, the destruction of Paradise Valley, and seeing the conditions that people live in and the conditions I think they should live in. It's just something that kept nagging at me to say, I got to holler about this one, and I'm very comfortable with the hollering.
When you think of reparative, and again, I know you're trying to stay out of the outcome of all of this, but what kinds of things would make sense? And I'm also asking that of you from the perspective as the head of county government. County government often has things that it's got to consider with regard to diversity and inclusion when it's making decisions. I can't think off the top of my head of a project that would have had to go to the reparative space that we're talking about here. But this question about including people and making sure that you don't damage people, you have to make those decisions too. What would that look like if they were doing it right?
Well, I think what would be most important here is that there be a real clear airing of what the motive for this is in the first place and how it is going to affect, the citizens in the area. I mean, and that's that's not a black area per se. That is an upscale area where people really are downtown for quality of life issues. And if you're committed to Detroit and here, you have a passion about being here, you really do. And so I just think the project, when you have meetings in the community to talk about what you think ought to occur, there needs to be a feedback loop that is very clear and concise about what MDOT decides based on what people want to see and do. I don't have any idea that this will be 100% slam dunk. No project is. I just think this is a project that almost embarrassingly to me tried to gain traction by being reparative.
They sold it that way for sure. And that was just intrinsically wrong. That's just a problem, and it had the hair on the back of my neck stand up from day one. And as I said, I've tried to stay out of whether it's a good idea in the first place or not, besides the tweaks. I mean, there are always going to be tweaks, but I mean, whether you raise it or you don't raise it is not something that I've come to any particular conclusion on. Can you imagine that we could recreate the neighborhoods there? I mean, one of the things that's occurred to me is that the conversation has been about the road, and that the road is driving the decisions about everything else. When the old road that was there, Hastings Street, wasn't the thing that was driving decisions about that community back then. I mean, it's kind of cart before the horse. Should we be imagining what that neighborhood could be and who it could be for, and then making the road fit the
right?
The
to me, that's
vision?
the starting place, Stephen.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's the starting place. What is the end result we'd like to see here in terms of community stability and community growth? You know, right across the street was the old unfinished jail for years. You know, and it was clearly my decision to not try to complete that project. You know, it's right at the beginning of downtown.
Right around that bend, right?
You know, it was one of those things where I'd heard an awful lot of noise about this is not what we want to have as the showpiece when people come into the city. And, you know, the other side of my decision, probably the biggest part of it, was this place has sat there through 2 or 3 winters, and there's no way in my mind you can complete the project and have the warranties and the stability that you want in a building that's just been left out here. So let's tear it down. Let's get it out of the way. You know, there were people clamoring about that. Are those same people? You know, that's right around the corner. You know, are those the same people that see a vision for, you know, raising 375 and to help support some other entrepreneurial ventures? If so, fine.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't have a problem with that, but I don't see this, frankly, I don't see this as the state's project. I really don't.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, 313-577-1019 is the number here on the phones. Let's go to David in Detroit. David, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you, Stephen.
Sure.
How's everybody doing? How you doing, Warren? This is David Greenwood. How are you?
Hey, Dave, how are you?
I'm good. Now, I just was listening to the show this morning, and it was a project that always been, you know, high on my mind. I grew up in that area. My grandmother lived not far from that area, and I would often hear from my father and my parents about what Black Bottom was and how it, all came to not be in existence. And I agree with what Warren said. The executive said that you can't put the cart before the horse. You got to actually do the work. And if the work's been done, that's fine. I would just like to hear, and Stephen, if there's people out there listening that know what those results were in those conversations, as far as who did they ask from the community, who did they ask from maybe the descendants or the survivors of what was once Black Bottom and Paradise Valley. If those questions have been asked, I just would like to hear what the answers were. And, you know, I don't know, like the county executive, I don't know whether it's a good deal, bad deal. I do have, you know, strong questions, and there's a lot more conversation that I would like to hear before that project takes place. And yeah, I agree. It's not really the state's project, even though they own the space there. It is really something that the entire community needs to weigh in on, and we need to hear what the results are. So that's really what I wanted to hear.
So, David, before I go back to the County Executive Evans, let me ask you this. Have you heard about the public hearings that the state has held on this, the efforts to include the community? Like, were you aware of those things?
I was not, and I'd like to think of myself as pretty aware of what goes on in politics and some of the things that go on, but I didn't hear about that. Like near where I work at Detroit Powell, you know, I hear about the project for Michigan Avenue, and they want to take up the bricks, and we've got a huge Save the Bricks campaign going on right now. So
I heard about that.
It's so there's a lot of you know, I don't know if it's a deaf ear that the state has. I'm not sure, or if it's you know, something from the business community or other people in that area that are pushing along what they want to see for I-375. But I just think there needs to be more awareness because I definitely didn't hear about it. So
yeah, well, and I think, David, that's actually part of the answer to your question, right? The state did put this process together to get the community involved in these discussions, and there were an awful lot of hearings that were held, but the number of people who know about those hearings, the number of people who feel like they were able to participate in those hearings is quite low, at least in my experience, although there are some people who say they went to all of these meetings and felt like they went well. At the same time, there is not necessarily, I think, a direct line to be drawn from the things that people said at these meetings and the ideas that they expressed and the final project, right? There's a bit of a disconnect. MDOT seemed to have a certain number of things already in mind, I guess, when they started this, and what people said about what they wanted or what people asked for didn't inform the plans in quite the way I think that most people imagine. And so I think that's one of the real problems here. But I'll let Warren Evans talk about that as well, David.
One of the things, Stephen, is, and you just see it now because of social media, people are gathering bits and pieces of information from a million different places, and probably close to a million inaccurate, because they're not the same level of reporting. When I can think back decades when you had the free press and the news, and the political spin may be different for each one, but there was some factual data in there that you could glean to kind of know which end is up. And I don't know that's happening anymore. So, I mean, there may be a well-intentioned idea of reaching out to get people involved, but well-intentioned and reaching everybody are two different things. And I won't argue about anybody's motive, but I don't think people got the word like they could have or should have.
Yeah.
And as I said, it's a tough process anyway. So, I mean, I don't want to make this look like I'm slapping MDOT necessarily, because selling projects like this are difficult. I've had mine that were difficult and otherwise. But here, again, the salient point to me is please do not try to sell me on this project based on some reparative theory that you have about making things right.
If that's not what you plan to do.
Right, yeah, and you can't plan to do that for me. You have to involve me and a bunch of other people, not me, big me, but me, a person of color, in that process. And, I can tell you for a minute, I've been in some meetings, one of them about the Innovation Center. I'm changing gears just a little bit. The first iteration, and one
this
of my
is the U of M
project. One of my concerns was, how is this going to fit into the fabric of the city of Detroit, and what is it going to do to benefit the city of Detroit? I mean, certainly it will benefit the brainiacs who will go, and maybe some of them will stay here and maybe they won't. But what's the connectivity to our other educational institutions, other things that may help to motivate kids to want to aspire to this sort of thing? Well, it just got lost on deaf ears. It's like, well, kids from community college aren't going to be going to the Innovation Center. That's not my point. My point is, what is that Innovation Center going to do that will be valuable to the community? And so a meeting was pulled together for people to talk about how do we involve Detroiters, which is the code word for how do we get people of color to be actively involved and to understand what we're trying to do.
That's right.
And so, I walked in the room, and there were about 26 people in the room, and I was the only black one.
Wow.
And I was there because I held the key to the use of the property, or I wouldn't have been there either. So
right. You had to be there.
So you look around and say, now here's a place where there are 25 people, all to decide what's best for the people of the city of Detroit.
And there's no African American.
And So I mean that.
Just one.
Yeah. When you see that, you just look around and say, okay, this is a much tougher task than I thought in the first place. Because if you don't understand the problem, it's hard to get to a solution.
Yeah. Okay, Warren Evans, County Executive here in Wayne County. It is always great to have you here. It was really great to have you here and expand on your thoughts about how we go about redeveloping I-375. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Stephen. Appreciate it.
We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we are going to talk about Donald Trump's appearance yesterday at the National Association of Black Journalists Convention in Chicago. It's on a lot of people's minds. I'm going to talk with Greg Bowens, who is a media consultant, a columnist for Deadline Detroit, and a member of NABJ. Greg and I both go back a long time with NABJ and as journalists here in the city. I want to get his take on what happened in Chicago yesterday. Would also love to hear from listeners about it. Did you see what former President Trump said while addressing black journalists in Chicago? What did you think of what he had to say? What did you think of the way he said it? We'll be right back with more Created Equal. We're back with more Created Equal from WDET in Detroit. I'm Stephen Henderson, and I'm really glad you've joined. Once upon a time, this time of year, I would be not in Detroit working, but off in another city with other African-American journalists from around the country during the National Association of Black Journalists annual convention. I've gotten to the point where I feel like I'm a little too old to keep going every year, and so I don't. But yesterday, during the convention that's taking place in Chicago this year, former President Donald Trump was one of the people who came to address the gathering of African-American journalists. And he said a number of things that have gotten lots of people's attention. The way he addressed the journalists who were asking him questions, some of the things he said about Vice President Kamala Harris, some of the things he said about what he will do for African Americans if he is reelected to the presidency. My phone was blowing up yesterday as this speech was taking place in Chicago, and I've had lots of conversations with people since it. I figured it would be a good idea to talk about it here on the show, and I've got a perfect guest to help me make sense of this appearance yesterday in Chicago. Greg Bowens is a media consultant, a columnist for Deadline Detroit, and a member of NABJ. He and I go way back here in the city together as journalists and as members of NABJ. Greg, welcome to Created Equal.
Hey, Stephen, how are you, man?
I'm good. It's good to hear from you.
Yeah, it's good to hear from you. I mean, that was crazy yesterday. That was crazy.
Well, that was going to be my first question. You and I have been at many different, NABJ conventions. We've seen a lot of things happen. One of my memories is, in fact, I think it was 1991 when President George H.W. Bush came to Detroit, where the convention was, to address the journalists, and there was a little bit of controversy then. I mean, there were a lot of people who didn't think it was appropriate for him to come. There was a question about who was going to get to ask questions, but it didn't compare at all to what we saw yesterday. It's like that was another lifetime.
Right. Yeah. No, yesterday was total and complete chaos. And, the having a president come to NABJ was always like a big deal, but I was getting calls from people all over the country. A mutual friend of ours, Carlton in Seattle, was outraged, that he was there. And we were on the phone. You know how you watch a football game with your friend on the phone and you're talking about it or you're texting back and forth while it's happening?
Right.
That's the kind of thing that was kind of going on there.
Yeah.
And
there was a lot of that yesterday.
And the outrageous part is that
inviting a guy who made it a practice of insulting black folks in general, and then and black reporters in particular, like April Ryan, I think that's her name.
Yeah.
The sister that used to cover the White House, and just, mean and nasty. So it was it was like adding insult to injury to have him come, given his background of insulting black folks, and he did not disappoint.
Yeah.
He did not disappoint.
So I want to talk about that idea of how you handle that. If you're NABJ and it's election year, as it is, and you've got two candidates, one who used to be the president and another who wants to be the president, and of course you want them both. What should they have done about Donald Trump? Was it crazy to invite him at all, or what did it make sense to invite him and have a panel of really great journalists on the stage to ask him tough questions and not back down? What would you have done?
Well, the first thing that should have been done was to have a more open process. People were more surprised about him coming than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And so there were questions about, well, how was he picked, and how were the panelists picked? And so there was a certain amount of secrecy, or less than a level of clear transparency going on with the membership, And so that's the first thing. The first thing should have been able to try and warn everybody this is about to happen, and second of all, have an open process for people to participate, and even ask the membership, would you like to see him
Do you
there?
want to do this?
So,
yeah.
Do you want to do this? And then let folks weigh in and blow off steam and all this other stuff beforehand, and that would have been good. But think about it. One of the things that we used to, and still makes sense, Stephen, is for NABJ's got to make news in order to be relevant. And so, part of him being there
they accomplished
made us relevant to the for sure, But
Everyone's
it was like,
about
who was going to defend black folks, African American journalists, from the perspective of how do we justify this in a real manner beyond the normal stuff, given his particular background.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. And so the president was the co-chair. Somebody had to resign over it.
There's a lot of controversy in the association now because of this. There's all kinds of people who walked away from the convention because Donald Trump was going to be there and did so publicly, as people do now on social media. There's going to be some fallout from that. But let's also talk about the things he said while he was there, and I guess what they tell us about this president. I mean, there aren't. I was thinking about this overnight. There aren't a lot of examples of Donald Trump actually talking with African American people about African American issues. He brings it up frequently at his rallies, but he's talking mostly to white folks when he's doing it. This was him talking to black people in a way that we hadn't really seen a lot of before. And I guess what for me stood out was how disrespectful it was, how bizarre it was at some point. I kind of, I'm always trying to see the better in people. I kind of expected that in front of that audience, he might at least try to be a little different, but he sure did not.
Yeah, I don't think so. One of the most disrespectful things is something I was thinking about overnight too, and have been reading about, and his questioning Vice President Harris, ethnicity, like is she really black? And I know that we have that discussion amongst ourselves. It's sort of like family when it comes to the descendants of enslaved folks. Which makes us African American as opposed to an immigrant who came from the Caribbean or Brazil or someplace else, Afro-Cuban. and that distinction has gained some notoriety over time as we've had discussions about reparations, for example, right?
Yes.
And so we hear these discussions happening in the Black diaspora, in Black America, to some extent. But it's insulting when Donald Trump does it because he's trying to create a wedge.
Yes.
It seems like in the Black community to tell African Americans, look, she's not really like you,
Right.
And it's like, are you kidding me? That sister went to Howard. She's an AKA. What are you talking about?
This isn't recent for her.
Right. This ain't no new thing, But it's almost like he was on the slide trying to be a part of the reparations conversation without really being a part of it,
Yeah.
and creating that division. And so he's erasing her identity in a way that is really insulting.
Yeah.
And that hurts.
And why he saw fit to bring that up is, again, one of the things that it's a little mystifying. I mean, he was asked a question about whether she was on the ticket because of her race. There was a way to answer that without going to where he did that probably would have done him a lot better.
Not if you're trying to split. Remember, if you can just peel off a couple percentage of votes on this thing and create some resentment, and particularly among folks when we're having this discussion about reparations that's still ongoing and who should get them and stuff like that. I forget the group that's really latched onto this as to what's a real Black American, what's a real African American, and that if you cannot trace your family history
to
the descendants of the enslaved, then you can't be a part of reparations, and you can't really call yourself a real African American, as it were, in the truest sense of the word.
Yeah, that's an interesting.
And so he's driving that wedge.
He's trying to play on that. Yeah. So I also want to talk about the things that he said about and to Black journalists and the role that Black journalists play in the narrative here. The history of the Black press, I think, is one of the issues that came up in the advance of him coming to the convention, that people were concerned that how would the Black press handle something like this? And in some ways he confirmed those fears, that you're giving a platform, I guess, to somebody who's saying really awful and racist things. At the same time, I thought they did a great job of assembling the journalists who were going to ask those questions in a way that it did feel more like a visit with the Black press than people anticipated. I've only got about a minute and a half left, but go ahead and talk about
Black
that.
press, you don't mean like the Michigan Chronicle or the Chicago Defender or Jet.
Sure.
You mean like Black folks that work in the press.
Yes, both. Well, both, right? All of us.
I don't know. I didn't see anybody from the Chronicle up there. I didn't see anybody from the Defender up there. Nobody from Ebony was up there, know.
Yeah. No, you're right.
And that was a question. It was like, amongst the Black journalists, it was like, where is the Black press?
Right.
And so the questions or the concerns that the Michigan Chronicle would have would be different, could be different in many ways from the Free Press.
Yes.
For example, and given the history of Black newspapers, Black TV, Black radio, does that give you more? It gives you a different lens to view things.
Yeah. And that's important.
Yeah, and straight up advocating for Black folks in a way that you might not be able to do at the Detroit News,
right?
Or someplace else. And so that element was missing from the panelists, and you got the anchor from Fox, and people are like, "Oh my God,
what's she doing up there?" Right?
Let the lies begin. Right. So I mean, again, that's part of the lack of transparency in being able to tell people why you picked the panel that you did for the guest that you did. Is another thing that really had people upset.
Yeah.
And, why wasn't April Ryan there? I get to go like plenty of people that could,
right, who could have done this differently.
Go toe to toe.
Yeah.
So
okay.
I mean, but it's going to cost us, and unfortunately.
Yeah. Okay, Greg Bowens, always great to have you here with us on Created Equal. Thanks for coming by to talk about Donald Trump.
All right. Take care.
That's going to do it for us on Created Equal. The show is produced by Carrie Jr. II and David Lyons. Our engineer is Nate Bender. The program director is Adam Fox. Created Equal is a production of WDET, a listener-supported service of Wayne State University.